Welcome to the Michael Shermer Show. It's your host, Michael Shermer. This episode is brought to you by Wondrium. Wondrium is the former teaching company in the Great Courses, which was a series, college-level audio and video courses, and now they've added documentaries and additional short-form videos, long-form courses, tutorials, how-to lessons, travelogues, documentaries, and much more, covering topics you've probably never wondered about, and now you know what you should check out. Wondrium is a subscription-based system, so you just subscribe, you have access to all their amazing content. I mean, just literally hundreds, thousands of courses now, each that are maybe 6 lectures, 12 lectures, 24 lectures. Some of them are 36. I've even found some 48 lecture courses. Here's one that just popped up on my app called Banned Books, Burned Books, Forbidden Literary Works. Think I'm interested in this topic? Guess what I'm doing this afternoon on my long drive to go teach my class at Chapman University? I'm listening to this course. There are 24 30-minute lectures. Oh, let's see. It starts with Shakespeare, and then Ulysses on Trial, The Defense for Lady Chatterley's Lover. Okay. Books on Fire, The Reformation to Rushdie. Yeah, well, Salman Rushdie, we know what happened to him. So this is a real thing, right? The banning of books, cancel culture, and so on. Here's some more canceled authors. Huckleberry Finn and Race in America. Oh, yes, because he used the N-word, and that's now taboo. How do you read those books now? Out loud? To Kill a Mockingbird, Alice Walker and Toni Morrison Under Attack. The Textbook Wars. I wonder if they have anything on J.K. Rowling here, because she's come under attack. Maybe that's under the Harry Potter. Yeah, but that's it. Anyway, check it out. If you subscribe through my podcast, you get 2 years for the price of one. That's a great deal. Why would you not do that? Go to wondrium.com/Shermer to get 2 years for the price of one. That's wondrium.com/Shermer, WONDRIUM.com/ you know the spelling, SHERMER, wondrium.com/Shermer. You get 2 years for the price of one. Check it out. All right. Thanks for listening. Here's the episode. My guest today is Dr. Marty Klein, who has been a licensed marriage and family therapist and certified sex therapist in Palo Alto, California for 42 years. Over 40,000 sessions with individuals and couples. Whoa, that's impressive. Marty's the author of 7 books on sexuality, including Sexual Intelligence, What We Really Want from Sex and How to Get It. His Porn, Her Pain, Confronting America's Porn Panic with Honest Talk About Sex. Beyond Orgasm, Dare to Be Honest About the Sex You Really Want. Ask Me Anything, that's his AMA. Dr. Klein answers the sex questions you love to ask. And America's War on Sex, the attack on law, lust, and liberty. We will be discussing not only personal sex issues, but also politics and policy issues. Marty's an outspoken critic of the many popular and clinical ideas about sexuality and emotional health. Wikipedia lists him as the foremost critic of the concept of sex addiction. He is a founding editor of the Journal of Porn Studies, and each year Marty gives expert testimony in various state and federal courts. A former instructor at Stanford Medical School, Marty's humor, insights, and down-to-earth approach are regularly featured in the national media, such as the New York Times, the New Yorker, Nightline, NPR, and the Huffington Post. Marty, nice to see you.
Michael.
It's been a long time. I've looked forward to this for years.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
I mean, if you just think about like the 300 and something episodes I've had, this one about sex may be not only the most interesting, but possibly the most important, given how important sex is to people's lives. Even though we don't like to talk about it that much, I think the more you read on it, the more you think, oh my God, this is really, really important to human relations.
Yeah, sexuality is an important thing. And the more that societies try to suppress it or control it or distort it, the more important it is.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's start off personally. You have an interesting story you write about of how you got into the sex therapy business. You were working at this clinic. Well, before you even get to the clinic where the people coming back weren't doing what you thought they would be doing. What is your background? How did you get interested in any of this at all?
Well, I have a pretty ordinary biography up to a point. When I was living in Santa Barbara after dropping out of graduate school, I got involved with Planned Parenthood. And became very involved in trying to help people use contraception as a way of reducing poverty and domestic violence. And from contraception, I got into sex, and I was um, I was helping people at the clinic, and they asked me to do a men's sexuality group, and I said I didn't know how to do that, and they said, "Well, nobody knows how to do that; it's never been done." And that's how I started. And sooner or later, I got licensed, and I was still in Santa Barbara, and I just went around to all the therapists in town, and I said, I don't want to take anybody's business or anything, but if you have any sex cases you want to send me, just send them my way. And almost overnight, I had a private practice. And then I moved up here to Silicon Valley, where I still am in 1985. And I've been working with engineers and high tech people and venture capitalists and lawyers since 1985. And when I wrote America's War on Sex, it has an introduction, a forward by Nadine Strawson, who was then the president of the ACLU. And she is just so incredibly respected by so many people that opened a lot of doors for me as well. And it also turned out to be prescient. I mean, pretty much if that book were published today, it would be pretty much right on target. So I've been seeing people in for therapy, for sex therapy, marriage counseling, couples counseling, individual psychotherapy, and then I also do this other side of my work. You know, the policy analysis and training, training physicians and bureaucrats. And just next week, I'm lecturing to the Federal Public Defender's Office in Seattle about child pornography and exactly how dangerous or not dangerous people who use child pornography are. So I'm just thrilled to death to be talking to you, because you know your work is just right at the intersection of so many things that I do and that I care about.
Yeah, super interesting. On your webpage, you have reasons why people come to see you for therapy. This is great. And these are all quotes. We fight all the time. I'm a sex addict, or I'm out of control sexually. I climax too fast. I can't keep or keep erections. I feel guilty or shamed a lot. I don't orgasm during sex. I think my spouse is cheating on me, or already has. I watch too much porn, or he watches too much porn. I spend too much time at strip clubs, massage parlors, or with escorts. I think about sex all the time. I want more intimacy. I just can't connect with anyone. I want to change my life, but can't figure out how. My in-laws are ruining our marriage. After being divorced for 5 years, I'm scared to have sex again. I'm successful and I feel like a fraud, or maybe I just want someone to talk to. To what extent do just that list, just people hearing that, does it affect them like, oh, I thought I was the only one? You mean this is a common thing?
Well, it's funny. So many people do think that they're the only ones who are struggling with the thing that they're struggling with. And as Shakespeare and the Bible and the Greeks point out, and the Victorians point out over and over again, there's only a half a dozen human stories. And the thing with pornography is kind of funny, because people will watch something over and over, and they'll feel like they're the only ones who are interested in that thing. Let's say sex with chickens, you know. And I point out to people that they didn't make those porn videos just for you.
That's funny, right? Yes. Yeah, if there's a high view count on Pornhub, it probably means you're not the only one.
It's not just you. That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's funny. Right. And so, how does one, like, just sort of in the clinical psychology profession, does one begin to specialize in that? I mean, are there now training programs and courses?
There are now. There weren't back then. Very, very, very much training, but now there's training. I mean, you can go to a half a dozen universities and get really solid graduate training. There's also a lot of what's a polite way of saying this? Half-ass training? Is that polite?
Sure.
If a person is serious and they want to get a good training in sexuality, it's there. Not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but if your training is only in a molestation and other distortions of sexuality, or B, stuff about gender and sexual orientation and sexual identity, which are the two most popular topics in sexuality training. If that's all the training that you have, then you don't know very much about sex and you don't have very good training. If you go to a much more comprehensive program, University of Minnesota, or a couple other places, then you get a lot more training than just that.
And so in addition to being a good listener so that you're not just, I need someone to talk to, what's involved when, a couple comes to you or an individual and they need help for one of those many different issues? How do you start?
Well, I have a half a dozen questions that I like to ask everybody, including what do you do for fun? The way that I start is I ask people what they want to accomplish in our work together. I say, I'm not going to ask you what your problems are. Most therapists start with what's your problems. I say, I'm not going to start with what's your problem. Tell me what you want to accomplish from our work together. And if it's a couple, it's interesting because half the time they don't agree on what they're there for. So let's start with why are you here? And what I want to know is, why are you coming in now? Why not 3 months ago? Or why not wait for another 3 months? Why are you coming in now? So the combination of what do you want to accomplish and why are you coming in now, that really covers a lot. And people tend to want to sort of tumble their story out. And I really don't want that. I actually interrupt people from doing that. I want to sort of shape the way that I hear the story. Because the ways that people tell their stories, and this is true whether it's about sex or anything, the way that people tell their story is part of their story. And the way that people tell their story is frequently part of the problem. So, I'm divorced and remarried. If you asked me back when I got divorced why I got divorced, I would tell you the truth and I would tell you why. And if you asked me 10 years later, why did you get divorced? I would have a completely different answer. And if you tell me today, if you ask me today, why did I get divorced? I'd have yet another answer. So I don't want people to just lay out this long story about what their problems are. I want to ask specific questions like, what do you mean by that? And does she know what you mean by intimacy? People spend years arguing about something. And when I ask somebody, what does your partner mean by that? A lot of times people say, I don't know. So people will say, I want more intimacy, or I want more affection, or I want more connection, or you're not present enough. And I'll say to the other person, do you know what she means by that? Or do you know what he means by that? And a lot of times people say no. And I said, let me get this straight. You've been arguing, according to you guys, you've been arguing about intimacy for 12 years, and you still don't know what she means by that. So what exactly are you arguing about if you don't know exactly what she means by that?
That's really funny. Yeah, for sure. So there you would probably push them on, well, something like an operational definition. Tell me exactly what you mean by it.
Yeah.
Or have them steel man each other's. What do you think she means by intimacy, or vice versa?
Yeah. Yeah. What I want to check on is, are they fighting about what they think they're fighting about? As you know, most couples, when they fight, they're not fighting what they think they're fighting about. They're not really fighting about, I can't believe you didn't pick up my dress at the dry cleaners. They're fighting about power, or they're fighting about recurring disappointment, or they're fighting about, I don't feel important enough, or they're fighting about, just when I move closer to you, you push me away. That's the kind of thing that people need to talk more about. And people are not very good about talking about that stuff. So what they tend to talk about is, I can't believe that you left your dirty dishes in the living room again.
Right. Yeah, that bit on memory and reconstructing the past, or the hindsight bias, is interesting, So what's the actual memory or experience you had? There's, Kahneman's remembering self and experiencing self, which are not always the same. So I'm divorced and remarried. So yeah, I see what you're saying. At the time, it had one explanation. 5 years later, it's something different. 10 years later, it's not just memory, though, right?
No. It's not just memory. It's human beings are meaning-making animals. As Nadine used to say, facts do not speak for themselves. people go through a narrative process to create coherent stories. Whether they're children or adults, it doesn't matter. Everybody um, does whatever they have to do to make coherent stories out of the events of their lives in the moment. And then when we remember the events, we may use those old stories or we may come up with new stories. It's not a matter of memory, it's a matter of the narrative process. So a lot of times people will have an event in their lives and they'll remember a feeling that's associated with that event. They'll forget the details of the event, but they'll remember the feeling. You know, what's that quote about listening to a lecture? People won't remember what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel, right?
Right.
So,
yes. Right.
and haven't you, Michael? Haven't you had the odd experience where you go to, say, a professional meeting or you go to a party, whatever it is, and you see somebody, and you know that you don't like them, but you don't remember why, or you know
Right.
that you know that you're pissed off at that person, or you know that the last time you interfaced with that person, you had a bad experience, but you don't remember why. And for the life of you, you don't remember why. And you have to ask yourself, like, do I honor that old feeling and be cold to that person? Or do I treat them like a regular person and experience them now and see how I like them now? I think everybody has that experience periodically, and it's a funny experience. So people will, for example, in my business, people will have an experience of, when I was a kid, my uncle used to tease me, or when I was a kid, my aunt used to want me to sit on her lap and do this or that. And at the time, it may have seemed fairly benign, but today, people are encouraging me. A lot of therapists are encouraging me to reassemble the facts into a narrative of exploitation. That happens a lot. Or for that matter, somebody was in therapy 5 years ago, and they think it was a fairly reasonable experience. 5 years later, they're with another therapist, and the therapist says to them, "Oh, that's unethical behavior." So I think that the lay public doesn't appreciate the power of those narrative processes nearly enough. And as therapists, I think we don't talk about it enough. And in the political arena, of course, the narrative process is everything. I just by happenstance this morning, I bought a tank of gas. I don't drive very much where I am. I don't leave my house very much, except to go to the airport, right? So, and in Palo Alto, everything is very close. So, you can, it's like being in downtown Santa Barbara, everything's wide. So I only get a tank of gas about once every 6 weeks. So I go to get gas this morning and I think, wow. Yeah, I think, wow, the price of gas has really dropped in the last 6 weeks. Right. And it really has. That's the fact of it. The price of gas has really dropped. Now, whether the average person integrates that as things are getting better, or that's an anomaly, or I still don't trust the government, everybody's got their own story about the reality that the price of gas has dropped like a stone in the last 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Let's tease that apart a little bit more, the reconstructed past. So going through a divorce was pretty miserable, but now I can look back and go, well, I'm more resilient for it. I now understand when people tell me they're divorced and it was painful. I go, oh, yeah, I totally get that. So that gives me deeper insight into other people's lives and human nature. And then I wouldn't have met my wife and had a little son now had none of that happened. And so it's like, okay, so now it has a completely different meaning than it would have 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Right.
So subsequent events change it.
That's right. And in my case, when I got divorced, I was sure that it was 100% her fault. And year
Really?
by year, yeah.
You a therapist?
I wasn't a therapist at the time. I was very young.
See.
When I got divorced, I was 26 years old. I was still a kid.
Okay. All right.
Because I got married when I was 21. I got divorced when I was 26. It was all her fault. Decade by decade by decade, I become more culpable for this failed marriage.
That's really funny. Yeah. So by the time people come to you, have they already consulted Dr. Google and read those self-help books? I read this little thing you wrote about here. Klein disagrees with the promises of these books, the self-help books that you pick up, make about improving sex with oral, anal, and fetishes techniques and information are not what most couples really need to make them happy. Here's you. A book called How to Get Your Wife to Hug You a Little Bit More, or How to Get Your Husband to Slow Down and Caress Your Hair and Love Doing It. Those aren't going to be the pop off the shelf bestsellers, right? But that's kind of what people need.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people do go to Dr. Google, and especially if their problems involve their bodies, like erection problems or painful intercourse. So I almost never get anybody who hasn't gone to Dr. Google first. Um, and also, when people feel victimized, they're very quick to go to the internet because there's a group of victims for every possible victimization. So, you know, my husband is a goddamn liar.com or whatever.
What?
Well, I mean, I'm just making that up. But,
yeah, it probably exists.
Yeah, unfortunately, and this is really unfortunate. You can find whatever you want on the internet, first of all, but people, very few people write in. Very few people have a lot of energy to tell everybody about, oh, my marriage is fine, or my kids are doing well. But when people feel victimized, oh, they have just unlimited energy for writing about 20 signs that your husband is cheating on you, or 10 signs that your wife, is spending too much money. And so I get a lot of people coming in with preconceived ideas about men who cheat or women who cheat. I get a lot of people coming in with preconceived ideas about sex addiction or porn addiction, a huge amount of that. I get a lot of people coming in basically quoting a lot of random strangers who are angry about the same thing that they're angry about, as if there's some wisdom there. And there isn't necessarily any wisdom in there at all, just a lot of unhappy people complaining about the same thing.
What is your explanation for the rise in that kind of victimhood culture that we are experiencing now? Seems worse than before.
It does seem worse than before. Methodologically, I'm hesitant to say that anything now is more the way that it is than things 25 years ago, because now we're just so much more aware of everything.
Right.
Like it seems like there are more train wrecks, literal train wrecks.
Right.
Mile-long Southern Pacific trains crashing. It seems like there are more train wrecks now than there used to be. But, 25 years ago, if there was a train wreck in Kansas, we wouldn't hear about it out here. Right. But now it's front page on the internet. So I think that a certain amount of the victimization that we see, or the perceived victimization, it seems like the easiest way to establish your identity now is through claiming victimhood. And I think a certain amount of that I put at the feet of social media, where, social media is just a rage machine. It's just, as you know, the social, and this is not an accidental oops feature of social media. I mean, this is built into the architecture that if people are angry about something, they're going to be encouraged to express that anger, and they're going to be more made more aware of the anger of other people. And before you know it, identities tend to coalesce around anger and coalesce around victimhood. And in the late stage capitalist system that we live in, there's a lot that a lot of people are angry about. I think that for a lot of people, being angry is easier than being sad. There's a lot to be sad about. Our families are splintered all over the place. We don't trust any institutions anymore. Everything's expensive. And I think a lot of people are just feeling sad and adrift. And I think it's just easier for people to express, a lot of people, not everybody. It's easier for a lot of people to express anger than it is to express sadness or confusion or alienation or grief or loss.
Yeah, I'd say so. And you get more attention. You get love bombed by the people that are in that cohort of fellow victims of X, whatever it is. And that reinforces it, I suppose. And you can elevate it so quickly on social media. You couldn't do that before. There was the internet. It was just print media. just wasn't much there.
Yeah, and before say 1975, when most people lived near at least some family members, there was a, not that I'm a big fan of people living near their families. I'm not, but I do recognize, I do, as a therapist, believe me, I don't, but I do recognize that there tends to be a moderating influence of older people on younger people when people live near other generations in their families. There tend to be, whether it's uncles and aunts or grandparents or even parents, saying, yeah, I've seen this before, or yeah, it's going to be okay, or yeah, there's other things to consider. And people are just exposed less to that moderating influence of older people.
Right. And so you get these fashions that come and go probably faster now than before. It'll be interesting to see if the trans movement lasts as long as some others in the past. That is the rise in self-reported trans. I was reminded from something you said earlier about the recovered memory movement in the 90s. You lived through that. And
Yeah.
again, it's this kind of interpretation by certain therapists of things that the client says, and they come in for whatever eating disorders or depression or sleep problems or whatever. And that gets interpreted as being a sign that you might have been molested as a child. No, I wasn't. Well, you probably don't remember it. You're probably repressing it. Well, maybe, I don't know. And then, 6 months later, they got a full-on memory of being molested. Now, according to the memory people like Elizabeth Loftus,
Beth Loftus,
that memory is now changed. There is no original memory. The new memory is you really were molested. That's the new memory.
Right.
And but then that all of a sudden it collapsed, with lawsuits where these adult women were suing the therapists for planting this false memory that ended up destroying their families and so on. And then all of a sudden everyone quit talking about it. It's like, well, what happened to all the molested adults that, adult children molested?
Right.
It's like, whoa, I don't know.
Well, there's two differences, at least two, that I can think of. But there's at least two important differences between the way that the recovered memory movement unraveled and the way that the trans movement may not unravel. The first difference is that there was no analog to the word transphobic or transphobia. There was no word for, oh, you're one of those people who doesn't believe in recovered memory. So there was no, oh, you're a satanic abuse denier, right? There was no traction on words like that. The second difference is that people who at that time did believe and were promoting and getting rich, thank you, on promoting these ideas about recovered memory and satanic abuse and all that, those people did not have political power to get people fired, deplatformed, etc. So back then, so I was one of the people who was saying the science really doesn't support this stuff. I didn't lose a lot of personal stuff that I valued as a result of opposing those ideas. I mean, there were some people who wrote me off as a kook because I didn't realize that there was such a thing as satanic abuse. But I didn't suffer very much as a result of that. When I think today about writing about some of the crazy ideas that have come out of the trans movement, I'm pretty wary about, is this a hill I want to die on? Is this an idea that I'm willing to suffer for? Because I know darn well, for example, I don't believe that there's such a thing as asexuality as a sexual orientation. I think the whole thing is just a silly idea. I know that there are a couple of million people who identify now as asexual, whatever that means. So on those occasions when I write challenging the idea that some people are asexual and that we have to treat them in a certain way and they belong in the basket with LGB, I get a lot of heat for that because of social media. And some of those people try and get me deplatformed. Now, I don't teach at a university. I used to I was an instructor at Stanford for a while, but I don't have the institutional support that can be taken away from me. But like this thing I'm doing next week in Seattle, I mean, there are people, if they wanted to, they could try and get me yanked from speaking at that event because I'm so asexual phobic yeah.
whatever that means.
So I think those are at least two important differences between the way that the repressed memory satanic abuse thing pretty quickly collapsed under its own weight on the one hand, and how the trans movement, I think at this point, is so powerful and has so many people frightened. Universities and medical schools are now teaching about pregnant people instead of pregnant women. And it has become so institutionalized so quickly and so deeply. I don't know how fast that's going to unravel, if it unravels at all.
Do you have a sense of to what extent the medical doctors say, or the professors at these med schools or anywhere, these institutions, corporations, universities, really believe all that, or are they just going along with it to prevent themselves from being canceled, cover themselves for lawsuits or whatever?
You know, that's an important question. And the analog that, before I answer the question, as my way of answering the question is, I have a lot of friends, as it happens, I have a lot of friends who live in Europe, in formerly communist countries. And for many years, I used to ask them, I don't ask them anymore, we've had these discussions, but for many years I would say, did you guys actually believe this stuff?
Right.
Now, of course, it's easy afterwards to say, oh, no, I never believed that, right? But practically everybody says, no, I didn't believe it, but I had to go along with it. Now, I certainly believe that there was a lot of coercion going on. But at some point, if everybody goes along with something, it doesn't matter if they believe it or not. Now, with that sort of my background on this thing, how many people, I think that everybody, almost everybody agrees that there's a substantial number of people who are in pain about this stuff. There's no question about that. What various people believe about what that pain is really about is another question. And I can tell you in the sex field, the older cohorts, people who have been around for a long time, tend to be a lot more skeptical about all these people. I mean, just overnight, the human race seems to have been transformed, right? And
Yes,
that's generally not the way it works.
Right.
Generally not the way it works. But therapists in their 30s, for example, they've been trained. I mean, if you take a human sexuality class, if you're 22 years old right now, let's say you're a junior or a senior in college, or you've been a junior or a senior in college, now you're out in graduate school. If you took a sexuality course, one of the main things that course focused on was sexual orientation and sexual identity. And if you want, you could say a lot of different things about it. I mean, it becomes how many angels dance on the head of the pin. So, you know, let's get a gay speaker, let's get a trans speaker, let's get a kink speaker, let's get a BDSM speaker. And the stuff that most people care about becomes less and less important in people's education or in people's training. So now you don't get a whole lot of 25-year-old university presidents, but I think the university presidents, for the most part, they're so scared to death and they're so hammered by their own lawyers or the institution's lawyers that they don't have time to really ponder what do they actually think about. I think what they think about is, I don't want to have another $8 million lawsuit at this institution on my watch.
I have a friend who's a university president, and basically that's his explanation for all the DEI and sensitivity training programs that all professors, all faculty have to go through, and administrators and so on. It's that so that if we get sued because Shermer did this, and we can look on the program on the computer and go, oh, he took the course. There it is. He completed the course successfully. We did our part.
Right. What do you want from us?
Whether that is a viable defense in a trial or not, I don't know. But at least
Well,
they can say
it
that.
is a viable defense in the sense that if somebody is suing a university for creating an environment that is inhospitable as they define it, the university has to show, look, we did our due diligence. We
Right.
vetted our professors, or we had them all go through DEI training or whatever it is. So if one of them, like Shermer, turns out to be a rogue, or if Mary Lou turns out to be creating an, I mean, the speaker that you probably heard the story about, this woman who, this instructor in an art department, she showed, or in a religion department, she showed a famous 15th century painting showing Muhammad's face.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And she got fired, even though the painting was painted by one of the most famous Muslim artists in the history of the world. And she had done all these warnings. I'm going to show this, if you don't like it, please don't come, and all this. So the university gets to say, we did our due diligence. She's a rogue. They're
Right.
weasels. They're weasels. But at least,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
how much do they really believe this stuff? I think there's a lot of, I don't believe this, but what I believe is really not the issue here.
yeah, yeah.
Unfortunately, if I were hiring a university president, I would care what the person believed.
You would think. Yeah, I always like that idea of pluralistic ignorance or the spiral of silence, where everybody thinks everybody else thinks something is true when in fact almost nobody does. And until the little boy says the emperor has no clothes, nobody
Exactly.
knows. So
Exactly.
that's why we have to have free speech, which is why you defend free speech, Nadine Strawson, and so on. That whole group, we need that. I don't know what happened to the ACLU though. They kind of went woke a little bit, but there's
Yeah.
fire.
That
So
those when I think about FIRE, and we should tell our listeners who FIRE is. It's Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, and now they've expanded their portfolio beyond education. They're the people now who are, and the URL for that is thefire.org. Thank you. Um, they're the ones now who are standing up, and it's independent of the content of the speech. So they will protect the speech of people who are radical right, radical left, anybody, because the principle here of defending free speech is more important than the content of the speech.
perfectly stated. Now, on the trans issue, so the hypothesis, okay, the problem on the table to be solved is why is there a sudden spike, 2,000% in some countries, of people identifying as trans? So the two hypotheses, as I understand it, social contagion or society is more tolerant now, and they were always there, and now the numbers are going up because those are the real numbers. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we don't have to choose between the two. We could have both, right? I think what's true is it's the same thing with BDSM. Not so much social contagion, but why overnight does it seem like so many more people are into spanking or this or that? And the answer is both. Society is more tolerant, and there's a certain amount of social contagion about it. And that's certainly what I think about the trans thing. I think that it's simply not plausible. It's just not plausible that there was such a huge underground for so long and nobody knew about it. It's just not plausible. And what is plausible is that, I mean, not plausible, what is factual is that if you look at all the markers of psychological distress, whether it's uh, people having eating problems, people having sleeping problems, people self-harming, people having trouble forming relationships, whatever it is. If you look at the conventional indices of personal distress, and we look at people who are identifying as trans, at the very least, we can say there's just as many depressed people who identify as trans as people who don't. In my experience, it's way more than just as many people. The conventional indicators of personal and psychological distress um, are pretty high among people who identify as trans. Where institutions, where guardrails like the psychology profession, the medical profession, where the normal guardrails would be to say, wait, here's a group of people who seems to be in a lot of distress. Because of political pressure, um, those guardrails have crumbled. And so a person who self harms if they happen to identify as trans, they don't have to take responsibility for their self-harming behavior. All they have to do is say, well, I'm trans, what do you expect? And they get a free ride. And I grieve for the ways in which these various professions have completely let society down. Psychology has let society down. Medicine has let society down. Research has let society down. Professional journals and publications have let society down by not challenging. Why are we looking less at the psychological health of this cohort than among other cohorts? Why is that? And the answer is strictly political.
In other words, we need more data before we can actually draw any conclusions. There was a study, I think it was published yesterday, that the number is now up to 10% of the population are trans. But if I recall, I haven't looked at this, somebody was just telling me about it, that it was mainly the age cohort, young teens to 20, or wherever they make the break, and not older cohorts. Say, people from 25 to 35 are not making that same transition increase spike that we see in younger cohorts. What would be the explanation for that?
Has there been a time in the ever since adolescence was invented, and that's about what, 100, that's about 140 years, right? Ever since the late Victorians.
Okay.
For the entire 20th century in urban places, and for half the 20th century in rural places, when we've had adolescence, every group of adolescents has something going on.
Right.
It sounds charming to younger people today, but when I was young, Michael, when you were young, smoking cigarettes was this racy, tremendously dramatic form of rebellion.
James Dean, yes, rebel without a cause.
what are you rebelling against? What do you got, right?
Yeah, right.
So I think that in a way, we sort of painted adolescence into a corner where there isn't a whole lot left that they can't do, and there isn't a whole lot left to rebel about. So if you have adolescents where their parents are using cannabis, where their parents have tattoos, where their parents all had sex before they got married, I mean, what's left? So I think a certain amount of the difference between people who are 15 and people who are 30 is simply that 15-year-olds are adolescents, and adolescents famously, they're subject to social contagion, and they're angry. A lot of adolescents, their main thing is to be angry and sullen. I wasn't like that, fortunately, but a lot of adolescents like that, and so here is just the perfect thing to do, which is to say, I reject the most fundamental thing about myself, and I reject the most fundamental thing that you believe about me. I mean, what is more fundamental to a parent than the gender of their kid? People will say, well, my kid is or isn't smart, my kid is or isn't artistic, my kid is or isn't athletic. Sure. But at the end of the day, we all know my kid is a daughter. We may not agree on whether my kid is musical. The kid says, I refuse to practice the piano. And the parent says, oh, but you're so good at it. And the kid says, well, screw you, I don't care. I'm not going to practice the piano. And eventually the parent can let go of that. But if you really want to challenge your parents when you're 15 years old, say that you're a different gender. Completely drive your parents insane. And so I think that's a lot of it. And I think a lot of it is at 15, most teenagers, most higher educated teenagers, or teenagers from middle class and above, they haven't had sexual experience or much sexual experience. And on the other hand, they've looked at a lot of porn, and they've heard a lot of stuff about sex and about gender. And I think that it's easy to be confused when you don't have a lot of your own experiences, but simultaneously you're exposed to a lot of conflicting ideas. And
Right.
you're 15 years old.
Right. Right.
So I think it's easy for 15-year-olds to get confused about what does it even mean to have a vagina? What does it even mean to desire a kiss or to not desire a kiss? What does it even mean to fend off the salacious leering of a whole bunch of adults that you don't want to have anything to do with? I think a lot of the girls, or young women, as they're now called sometimes, but a lot of the girls who want to transition into identifying as male or non-binary, I think a lot of that is, it is really a big pain to be a 14-year-old girl or a 15-year-old girl, especially if you have a curvy body. And one way, what's commonplace, we see a lot of 14, 15-year-old girls who wear like really baggy clothes so you can't see the shape of their body. That's no accident. But I think for a lot of young women who don't want to deal with all the baggage of being 15, 16-year-old females, talking about being non-binary solves a lot of problems. And it seems to them that it comes at a very low cost. As adults, I think we have a better perspective on what that costs. But I think for them, it seems like a low cost, high reward arrangement.
As long as they don't do anything permanent, like get the top surgery or the bottom surgery or something like that. Have you had any parents come to you say, my teenager's says they're a different gender and they want to get the surgery? What do I do?
The answer is no. I mean, I've had one or two in 20 years, but there are so many therapists now who market themselves as, I specialize in that stuff.
Really?
Yeah, I'm in the Bay Area. I don't know how it is in Nebraska,
right.
But in the Bay Area,
Right.
there are so many therapists who specialize in sexual orientation and sexual identity and all of that, that customers tend to find those therapists rather than come to see me.
Right. Right. But but I'm just asking your opinion. I mean, it's one thing, like in our generation, if you grow your hair long, well, you can cut it, or you dye it, you undye it, or you get a tattoo. I guess you can get the tattoo erased or whatever. But, if you get these surgeries, they're irreversible. That's it.
Right.
Game over.
Right.
Or you start taking the hormone treatments in adolescence, that's going to change your body, probably irreversibly. I mean, we don't know for sure, but it's what it looks like. And then one more confusion, and here I'll let Andrew Sullivan do the speaking for me because he's a gay guy who says, when you tell a 13-year-old boy who seems to be interested in other boys that he's not gay, he's in the wrong body. And so Andrew thinks this is a form of homophobia, or at least it's not helpful to young gay guys.
Well, here's something that I don't understand why other people don't understand it, or I don't understand why other people don't talk about it. I hear all these young people saying that I was assigned male at birth, or I was assigned female at birth, and I find now that I'm 15 or 25 or whatever, I find that gender designation much too confining. So I'm going to identify as a female, or I'm going to change my body, and my feeling is, haven't we spent the last half century saying, just because you're a woman doesn't mean you have to be female-y, girly thing, and just because you're a guy doesn't mean you can't cry, I don't understand why it's supposedly progressive for a girl to say, I don't want to be girly, therefore I'm going to go be a boy. Because if you don't want to be girly, don't be girly. It's a world with a lot of options here. You don't want to be a nurse, you want to be a doctor, go be a doctor instead of a nurse. You don't want to be a flight attendant, you want to be a pilot, go be a pilot. You don't have to not be a female in order to do whatever you want to do. And you don't have to be male in order to be allowed to take ballet classes or cry or have black nail polish or, whatever it is. So what I don't get is why the gender movement or the trans movement is not being called out on. Seems to me you guys are reinforcing gender stereotypes rather than challenging them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then there's, so I'll just give one anecdote. I had a trans student, a woman who said she decided she wanted to be a man or boy or whatever. These are 18-year-olds. And it was clear to me she, at least in this one example, she didn't really want to be a boy. She wanted to be trans. That was kind of the cool thing. And all the other students, and it's just class of 25, just had tons of questions for her. She gets love bombed for, oh, you're so courageous and brave to do this and so on.
Right.
But then as it came out, because it's a seminar, so we're just talking, that she had spent years in therapy. She has a psychiatrist. She's taking different kind of medications for anxiety and depression and I don't know what. And I thought, okay, this is so complicated by so many things. And this is from the time she's like 13 to 18. How could you possibly tease out what's really going on?
Yeah, we're not nearly sophisticated enough to be able to evaluate those things. And historically, when clinicians, whether they're physicians or therapists or whomever, historically, when clinicians didn't know what's the right thing to do, doing nothing was frequently seen as the best thing to do. Nowadays, there's so much mythology about the enormous amount of suicide among trans and non-binary kids, which I think is total disinformation. But the myth now is that every kid who's questioning their gender, or any kid who's interested in being trans or this or that, those kids are just walking suicide bombs, and that we have to be in a huge hurry to intervene and give them whatever they want, because if we don't, they're going to collapse and they're going to kill themselves. And the idea of watchful waiting, which has a long and very positive history in medicine, and in a lot of ways it's a very progressive idea, watchful waiting. Like if you have an enlarged prostate, watchful waiting is a big improvement over, let's hack up your prostate the second you have a problem. But the idea of watchful waiting now is practically considered to be malpractice by some people. And before we go around tinkering around with the lives of 14-year-olds, I think a certain amount of watchful waiting is really, really important. And if I were the parent of a kid who was, say, 14, who was struggling, rather than immediately give into, okay, we'll change your name, we'll bind up your tits, whatever it is, before I would do that, I would say, look, it's clear to me that you're struggling, and I want to be helpful. I want you to acquire the tools that you're going to need to live in this world. Whether you change gender or not, whether you change your name or not, you're going to need a certain amount of psychological sophistication to get through this world. Let's make sure that you get that along the way, and let's make sure that we start with that, which is going to be valuable to you no matter where you end up, no matter what you call yourself, no matter what we do with your body or we don't do with your body. Let's teach you some communication skills. Let's teach you how to moderate your anger. Let's teach you how to get along with people. Let's teach you how to have empathy for people who disagree with you. You're going to need that no matter what. And the lack of empathy among some gender activists is just astonishing to me. To the way that they're trampling on people who are 99% allies, but not 100% allies. It's just staggering. So I agree with you, Michael, that we don't know nearly enough about how this whole thing works among younger people, and we should be so much slower to intervene.
Mm-hmm. So you hear this phrase, I was born in the wrong body, which I have trouble with philosophically because it's kind of a Cartesian dualism. Like there's me and then there's my body. Like these are two different things. There's no ghost in the machine. There's no soul there. So what do they really mean just kind of medically? Is it just, a different ratio of hormones that makes you feel like you're in a different body or whatever they're trying to capture with that phrase. Because gender dysphoria is a real thing, right?
Well, gender dysphoria is an existing diagnosis.
Okay.
Whether it's a real thing, we could have an interesting conversation about
Yeah,
that.
go ahead. Sure. Give me your
The
thoughts.
same thing as, is there such a thing as borderline personality? The same thing as, is there such a thing as gambling addiction? So we have certain categories. They're useful to some extent or other, and we use them because we don't want to write 2 pages when we just want to say, so Michael, I'm talking about such and such, right? And you say, yes, I know what you mean. And now we can have the conversation instead of me saying, well, there's this configuration and so on and so on.
Yeah, okay.
So in terms of being born in the wrong body, I think that the idea, of course, there's the dualism that's sort of baked into that idea, but I think a lot of people don't feel comfortable in their bodies. And it's not limited to gender. I've always felt, I'm going to be really personal about this now. I've always felt that my chubby, overweight body was not an accurate reflection of who I was on the inside. And I think a lot of people, they feel that their height doesn't reflect who they are psychologically, or I think the fact that they aren't as athletic as they imagine themselves to be, or they aren't as musical. Some people, they sing like they have a beautiful voice and they're always off key.
Yeah.
And how nice to be so unself-conscious, right? On the other hand, some people that, they hear themselves and they say, I can't believe that that's my voice, because inside my own head, that's not what my voice sounds like. So I think that the gender thing, in some ways, is just a variant of that. Then, the specific thing about the wrong genitalia or this or that, I think different people mean different things by that. I think that if you were to decide that you were born in the wrong body, you would have certain assumptions about the meaning of your body, not because as I'm sitting here talking to you now, I don't feel my eyes, I don't feel my skin, I don't feel my genitalia right now, I don't feel my nose. So what would it mean to say I'm in the wrong body? It would mean that I would have to have a narrative of what my body means, and I would be rejecting that idea. So I might say, let's say I have a male body, which I do, but I don't feel male. What would that mean? It would mean that I put a meaning on the body that I have. You're at an age, as am I, where we look in the mirror and we're surprised, like, excuse me, I sort of think of myself as being 47 years old. I look in the mirror and for sure I ain't, right? So like, yeah. if you talk to older people, older meaning like us, older people, or even older than we are, I talk to a lot of my friends where they say, I just don't feel 68 years old, or I have my aches and pains. That's how people talk about feeling older. People say, I'm aware of physical pain, but I don't feel older. And in that respect, people have body dysmorphia, right? If I look in the mirror and say, that's the darndest thing, I feel young, and especially after a conversation with Michael, when I'm done with this, I'm going to be smart and funny for the rest of the day in my own head, right? In my own head. I'll see my wife. She'll say, "How are you?" And say, "What? You didn't hear the recording? I'm so smart and funny and charming." And so, but when we look in the mirror and we say, "Huh, that old guy in the mirror, is that really me?" That's a form of body dysmorphia, isn't it?
Interesting. I've never thought of it that way, but yes, I guess that would be true. Especially for me, it's when I look at younger pictures of me at 50 and 40 and 30 and so on. It's like, whoa, because you look in the mirror, you just see yourself every day. You don't really notice it.
When I look at pictures of myself younger, first of all, my
Yes,
right,
yes.
like this, and
Right.
like this is
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah. Right.
The difference is that I don't go around insisting that I'm really 47, even though my body is 73. I don't go around insisting I'm 47. Now there are people, they keep getting plastic surgery because they want to look like they looked when they were 47. And there are some people, plastic surgeons do talk about this, that there are some people that they keep getting plastic surgery because they believe that at some point their body will look on the outside the way that they feel on the inside.
So interesting. That's a kind.
That's
Yes.
body
All right.
dysmorphia, right?
Right. Right. And
So
they
to
get the surgery. Yes. Okay.
so to
Interesting.
say I was born in a male body, or a body that's identified as male, and I'm not really male on the inside, a person would have to say that they have certain expectations about, or they assign certain meaning to the feelings that they have about themselves, and that their body, the way that it actually looks on the outside, has certain meaning also. And the collision of those two meanings, that's the what people mean by, I was born in the wrong body and I have to get surgery and this and that.
Is there any data on uh, how, to what extent homosexuality is not needed to be treated by clinicians as much anymore because now it's accepted? So many of the problems that gays had in the 70s, 80s, and 90s have now largely gone away because they don't have to be in the closet. They don't have to pretend to be people they're not, and so on. So they don't have to suffer depression or anxiety about those sorts of things.
Well, I'm not the world's expert on that question. And when you take a paper and pencil test to determine, or to help determine if, say, you're depressed, the test doesn't ask you, are you depressed because you don't get laid, or are you depressed because you're gay? Are you depressed because your brother is a millionaire and you're not, or are you depressed because your mother hated you? Um, so that can be difficult to tease out. You're probably aware of the studies back then, Evelyn Hooker, in those studies um, where it turned out that self-identified gay people were as emotionally were pretty much emotionally equipped the same way that straight people were, that it was in fact the discrimination and all that stuff that made them
Yeah.
miserable. I assume that there's follow-up studies on that. I'm not aware of what they are. It's not something that I would, be going after. Jung famously said that the goal of therapy is to convert unnecessary neurotic suffering into ordinary everyday unhappiness. So,
Right.
so you and I lived through, gays want the right to be in the military, gays want the right to be married, which, sure, why not? But it seems like what gays have accomplished is that now they get to be as miserable as everybody else for the
That's
same
right.
reasons, instead of being miserable for special reasons.
That's right.
Okay. I mean, I want the right to be miserable in the same way that everybody is. I don't want to be discriminated against because I have a beard, or because I'm Jewish, or, 73, or this or that. I want to be miserable, the same way that everybody else is.
All right, let's talk about one of these issues that's both personal and policy or politically oriented. That is sex education. Who should be doing this? Parents, schools, sex education experts, clinicians like yourself. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, sex education is going on all the time. When dad is washing dishes and mom comes up behind him and pats him on the butt, and dad smiles, kids see that. That's sex education, right?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
When kids are at the dinner table and someone says, "Oh, the neighbor lady has a new car," and mom says the neighbor lady is a slut because she'll sleep with anybody, that's sex education too. And when
Right.
kids are being bathed when they're 2.5 or 3 years old, and mom or dad is washing them and saying, "Oh, what a beautiful face you have," and "Oh, what a beautiful chest you have," and "Oh, what beautiful belly you have," and now you can't see this on camera, but now I'm hopping over to my knees, right? "Oh, what beautiful knees you have."
Yeah.
That's sex education too. Like, what's up with that part of my body that it's not beautiful the same way the other parts are? So it would be nice if parents took their responsibility a little more seriously about teaching their kids that their bodies are okay, and that their sexuality is okay. Unfortunately, as we know, a lot of parents, they let's even leave out the parents who think that sex is horrible. There's a lot of parents who are just not comfortable with it, and so they don't want to talk about it, or they say, I'll answer my kids' questions honestly as soon as they ask me. To which I say, you didn't wait around for your kids to ask you, Mom, would you please teach me how to brush my teeth? You'd still be waiting. The kid's 14, you'd still be waiting, right? So parents feel they have an affirmative obligation to teach their kids a lot of stuff that the parents themselves are not comfortable with. Like a parent doesn't say, I'm terrified of dentists, and that gives me the right to not teach my kid to brush their teeth, right? Or so when parents say to me, well, I'm uncomfortable talking to my kid about sex, I say, yes, so what's your point? You have an affirmative obligation, whether you're comfortable with it or not. I sympathize. Saul Gordon used to say, there isn't a parent on this earth who's comfortable talking to their kids about sex. So I sympathize when parents say, look, I was raped when I was 12, and so I'm not comfortable talking to my kids. Fine. But you do have an affirmative obligation that your kids learn certain stuff. So if you're not going to be it, get your sister or your sister-in-law or your uncle or your niece, or get somebody to teach your kid. Get a couple of books, leave them around the house. Saul Gordon used to say, buy a book about sex for your kids and then hide it in the closet. So they'll go looking for it, right? Of course, it should be taught in schools. But of course, the schools, historically, this is not new. Historically, schools are, political institutions. And when people get nervous about values in schools, sex education comes under direct focus. We're seeing that again now with the whole 1619 project and what do you teach kids about racism and all that. It's the same story of there are always going to be parents who are nervous about kids being taught values about the thing that they're nervous about or the thing that they are particularly interested in. So I bet there's some parents who are concerned about, I don't want you to teach my kids about slavery. I bet there's some of those parents who say, you want to teach them about sex? Fine, go ahead. Just not about racism, right? So right. On the other hand, there are lots of parents who fantasize about, I want a pedagogy that is value-free. There is no such thing. You can't possibly have a pedagogy because every pedagogy involves making choices. What do we leave out? What do we include? Why is it? I used to show this picture a long time ago when I was training therapists. I used to show this picture of the male and female, you should pardon the expression, genitals, to point out, here's the clitoris, here's this, here's that. Now, the pictures that I would take from medical textbooks that were published in the 60s and 70s, number one, they wouldn't include the clitoris. And number two, the caption on these pictures would be male reproductive system and female reproductive system. It wouldn't be male sexual system or male genital system or male pleasure system. It would be male reproductive system. That's a pedagogic choice that, of course, is value-based. So every instance of learning is going to involve choices and values. I would love...
On that front, how much of that is driven by religion and America's unique kind of Judeo-Christian heritage and emphasis much more than in Europe, for example? Or is it just squeamishness on the part of everybody to talk about it at all?
Well, it used to be easy to say, everybody in America is so religious, and so that drives the sex negative movement in schools. And of course, religious people tend to be a lot more vocal about what they want in public schools than non-religious parents. So there's an outsized influence of religion. But honestly, I think a lot of it is simple parental discomfort and ambivalence. Let's remember that an enormous percentage of the kids in school today, their parents have lousy sex. Their parents have emotionally painful sex. Their parents were sexually exploited as children. Their parents are struggling with their mate's infidelity. Their parents feel guilty about masturbating. Their parents look at porn and hide the fact that they look at porn from their mates. Their parents look at porn and they feel ashamed of the content of the porn that they look at. These are the parents of the children who the school has to decide, what are we going to teach these kids about sex? And for most parents who are uncomfortable about sexuality, they feel, the less you talk about sex in school, the better. Now, realistically, it's not like, well, if you don't know what year Charlemagne was born, it really doesn't matter. It really, the lack of information about sexuality is not neutral. The lack of information about sexuality is negative. It is value laden. The fact that young people don't know about the clitoris is a very important thing in their lives. The fact that young people don't know that most young people masturbate or think about sex is very important. So it's not the lack of conversation is not value free.
Interesting. All right, that gets us to porn, because a lot of people are getting their sex education through porn. I loved your appearance on Penn and Teller's Bullshit, where you say there is no proof, no verified scientific data that people who look at pornography are more likely to commit violent or sexually deviant acts than anybody else. There's actually evidence to the reverse. Anti-porn crusaders like to use the phrase violent porn as if it was one word. The good news is that most pornography is not violent. Okay, so let's talk about porn.
You got about 5 hours, Michael?
I know you wrote a whole book on it.
Yeah, at least one. People look at porn as part of masturbating. It's the people who look at porn when they're not masturbating. Those are the people I'm concerned about. Like, what are you actually doing when you're looking at porn and you're not masturbating? Are you there for the music or the costumes, or
the music?
So
yeah, it's such good music.
So most people look at, men as well as women. Most people, or people of all genders.
Okay.
People of all genders who look at porn, they do so as part of masturbating. And a lot of the conversation out there in the world about porn is really about masturbating. So my question is, when people say, I don't want my boyfriend or my girlfriend to be looking at porn, my first question is, well, are you okay about them masturbating without porn? And if the answer is no, I don't want them masturbating at all, particularly since I'm not getting laid enough, then I say, well, then the conversation isn't about porn. It's about masturbating. So, if I say to you, how do you like The Daily Show? And you say, well, I think it's junk. Well, we can agree or disagree or whatever. But if I say to you, how do you feel about TV in general? And you say, oh, watching TV is a waste of time. It's complete junk. We don't need to talk about The Daily Show. So the first thing about the discussion about porn, the first thing is that let's make sure that we're all okay with masturbating. If we're not, it's pointless to talk about porn. That's the first thing. The second thing about porn is that the conversation about porn is rarely done by people who identify themselves as, well, I'm a porn user here. Speaking as a porn user, blah, blah, blah. So, if the government wanted to ban Toyotas, there'd be a lot of people from all different social classes who would rise up and say, excuse me, as a Toyota driver, here's what I think. For obvious reasons, you don't get a lot of people from any social class who are willing to say, well, excuse me, as a porn user, here's my experience. For example, as a porn user, I've never looked at violent porn in my life. Or as a porn user, the only violent porn I like to look at is this. Or as a porn user, blah, blah. So in the absence of porn consumers having a voice, the field is left, the field of discussion is left to people who either don't use porn and don't know what porn's all about, or people who do use porn and feel terrible about it. But certainly, if you ask the average porn user, have they seen a wide range of porn? The average porn user say, yes, they've seen a wide range of porn. How much of it is violent? Not that much. Okay. But if you talk to an activist, if you talk to anti-porn activists, the way they talk about violent porn and slicing of women's bodies and this and that, you would think that 99% of porn is violent. And it isn't. Very little of porn is violent. Now, a small percentage of a big number is a big number, right? You know, if everybody in China gave you a penny, you'd be a rich man. So a small percentage of a big number is a big number. But most porn isn't violent for the simple reason that most people don't want to look at violent porn. Most people, they want to look at people with smiles on their faces, whether they're cum dripping off of those faces or not. And then the other thing is, how does anybody define violence in porn? I've heard people say, or I've been on debates with people who say that if a man ejaculates on a woman's face, that's sexual violence. Even if the character is saying, "Oh, baby, please, come on my face." So it's possible to define a huge amount of what the average person sees in porn as violence. Somebody being spanked. I've heard people say, well, when a woman is having sex with two men, that's violence on the woman. And if two women are being portrayed in porn as having sex with one man, well, that's the aggressive male gaze. So either way. So my question to the psychology industry and my question to anti-porn activists is, show me an example or describe an example of healthy porn use. And most anti-porn activists don't have one.
They can't even steel man the other side.
And what's interesting is that the world's literature, the world's art, is an unambiguous expression that people have fantasized about sex since the beginning of recorded history. Presumably before that, but okay.
Probably, yes.
But from the beginnings of us knowing what human beings think and feel, it has involved sexual fantasy. The internet didn't involve porn, didn't invent porn. Hugh Hefner didn't invent porn. So the idea that the act of voluntarily arousing yourself by engaging with sexual imagery, that there's something wrong with that, that's a fundamental denial of the way human beings are. And I'm not even up to, do I think that that's good or bad? I'm just saying that's the way human beings are, folks.
Yeah. Well, we got to start there with the nature of reality and human nature. Although you mentioned in your little scenario there, if she's not getting laid and he's masturbating to porn,
right?
Well, there would be an example, would it not, if you were a clinician for this couple? Well, you do have a problem, dude. She wants some love, and you're online, and that's a problem.
Nope.
No.
You're in the right direction, but I wouldn't say, dude, you have a problem. I would say this couple has a problem.
Okay. Right. All right. Fair enough. Yeah.
And I would wonder. So I would say, Mary Lou, we've got a heterosexual couple in this story. I'd say, Mary Lou, what does Joe tell you about why he doesn't want to have sex with you? Let's start with that.
Yeah.
Right? Now, sooner or later, remember I talked about how the conversation isn't about porn? Sooner or later, I will say to her some version of, what's your problem with him masturbating to porn? And she'll say, well, I'm not getting laid enough. I say, fine. So the problem here is that you want to have more sex. Why don't we approach that directly instead of indirectly? And the indirect approach is, see, here's the thing. We'll get him to masturbate to porn less, and he'll have like this surplus horniness, and he'll direct it toward his wife. She'll have more sex. She'll be happier. This is what I refer to as the broccoli ice cream hypothesis, which is if you want somebody to eat more broccoli, take away their ice cream. You want the guy to have more sex with his girlfriend, take away his masturbating to porn. It doesn't work that way. The reasons that when you have a situation where a woman wants more sex and the guy doesn't want to do it, it's generally not because if the guy were to tell the truth, it's not that he would say, listen, honey, I am so sexually satisfied jacking off to porn 4 times a week, that I just don't have any sexual interest in you. That's not the way it works. The way it works is I don't have as much sexual interest in you as you would like, and it's for one of the following 25 reasons.
And that could be what?
I don't like what we do. I don't like the way you smell. I have erection problems with you. I ejaculate before you have an orgasm and then you give me a hard time. I ejaculate before you have an orgasm and you're fine with it, but I feel like a schmo. We don't have as much sex as you would like because the way you like to do it, it hurts my lower back. We don't have as much sex as you would like because you only want it in the mornings and I want it at night. Or before you're ready to have sex, we have to do the dishes, we have to do the laundry, we have to vacuum, right? So I don't want to have sex with you because I'm just angry with you. I don't want to have sex with you because I don't like you. There's lots of reasons. There's lots of reasons that Joe doesn't want to have as much sex with Mary as Mary wants, or have any sex with Mary at all. And not surprisingly, when Joe doesn't have sex with Mary, he wants to have sex. He doesn't have an affair. He masturbates at night to porn, and it's not his first choice, but it's the way that he has made peace with his life. She has not made peace with that life because she wasn't consulted. He didn't say to her, listen, here's the deal. I want to stay married to you. I don't want to have sex with you. How about if I just jack off to porn every night and you can do whatever you like? It wasn't a mutual decision. So he has imposed this arrangement on her, and she's pissed off. I understand that. The issue here, though, is not about pornography. Most people would rather chew glass than have the conversation of, hey, whatever happened to our sex life? People don't want to talk about it. People would rather chew glass than have that conversation. It's much easier. It's much easier to talk about, I don't want you to watch porn. Well, there's nothing wrong with it. Or, I don't want you to watch porn. Okay, I won't do it. And then I do it anyway.
Right. And would you approach it the same way if somebody had an affair in a marriage or a committed relationship? You wouldn't discuss the affair because that's a result of something else. Why is this person going out for sex somewhere else than in their partnership?
Well, there's a few differences between infidelity and watching porn. Although I do get an amazing number of people claiming that watching porn is a form of infidelity. But,
really? You cheated
which
on
is
me.
amazing.
Okay.
but one of the main differences is that, number one, most couples, they do have an explicit contract of sexual exclusivity. They say, let's get together. We won't mess around with anybody else, right? Right. Okay. Most couples do not have an agreement. Now, if I agree to marry you, you're not going to watch porn, right? Most couples don't have that agreement.
Right.
In fact,
Riley.
most couples don't have the agreement. If we get married, you're not going to ever masturbate ever again, unless I'm like in the hospital dying, right? So,
Right.
so when he goes off to masturbate, looking at porn, generally speaking, he's not breaking an explicit agreement, whereas infidelity is breaking an explicit agreement. And it's easy to conceptualize masturbating to porn as a victimless crime, whereas with infidelity, there's a lot of ripples all over the place, inside the relationship, outside the relationship. And infidelity is not quite as easy as, what's wrong with this marriage that you had an affair? Sometimes infidelity is, I have several options and none of them is a good option, and I'm going to settle for infidelity.
Are there differences between men and women in just their desire for sexual variety, which is not going to be acceptable in a marriage unless you're polyamorous, and it's nothing more than that, or is it usually some deeper reason?
Oh, there's about a half a dozen different kinds of infidelity. One of them has to do with, well, you don't have sex with me, so what do you expect me to do? But that's only one kind of infidelity. And there's a certain amount of data that women who are unfaithful it's more to have an emotional connection with somebody, whereas men just want to get laid. But in my clinical experience, a lot of men who have affairs, they want hugging, they want affection, they want talking. I mean, if you talk to sex workers, they'll say the sex is 3 minutes of it, and then there's 57 minutes of me listening to the guy talk about his life.
Right.
So a certain amount of infidelity from both men and women, people of all genders, a certain amount of infidelity is I want somebody who thinks I'm attractive. I want somebody who laughs at my jokes. I want somebody who looks forward to seeing me. I want somebody who likes to watch me get undressed. I want somebody who I look forward to seeing because I don't see them every day. So a certain amount of infidelity is an attempt to cope with the tedium of a relationship that works and is more or less satisfying, but it's missing a certain kind of emotional resonance or emotional validation or emotional connection. And the thing is that if you're on an airplane and you turn to the person, and it's a 6-hour trip, you're coming back from New York, right? Long 6-hour trip, not a 5-hour trip to the East Coast, a 6-hour trip back from Philly or New York. And you're talking to the person next to you, and they're really nice, and you resonate. Oh, you like mystery novels? I do too, and so on and so on. And at the end of that trip, if you say, we both live in the Bay Area, listen, how about if one of these days we make a date? I'll meet you at the Fairmont Hotel. Spend the afternoon in bed. Now, most people, I think, will say no, thank you. Some people would say, great idea, but nobody would say a sexual affair with a stranger. I've never heard of such a thing.
Right.
However, get this. If you turn to the person, that same person on the airplane, and say, we both live in the Bay Area, we get along real well. How about if we just get together and cuddle every once in a while? How about if we just get together and talk, and you tell me you like my body once in a while? How about if we get together and you just brush my hair for a little while? People will look at you and say, that's the craziest thing I ever heard. There's no category for that, right? There's a category of sexual infidelity, but the category of I want validation, I want somebody to laugh at my jokes, I want somebody to say, I understand that everybody thinks you're just a dentist, but you're actually like a screamingly funny person. We don't have not to put dentists down, you understand. We don't have a category for that. So, so what happens is a lot of people, they want that. They begin sexual infidelity. The sex lasts for a certain amount of time. It's like in some infidelity, you come for the sex and you stay for the emotional connection. You come for the sex and you stay for and some people who are cheated on or betrayed, they're shocked to discover, wait. You're cheating on me for that? Are you kidding me?
Right.
That person, they have thinning hair and they have dirt under their you're for that? People say, well, that person remembers my birthday. That person cut an article out of a magazine because they thought I would like it. That's why I'm cheating. So that's a lot of it.
Yeah. Wasn't there a story a couple years ago about cuddling sessions you could go to? And I just laughed when I read that. It's like, who's going to go for this? And how would it not escalate to the next step? Come on.
You dirty man.
I guess there's rules about that. But polyamory is now kind of a thing, I'm told, in which you, with each partner in the relationship, agrees that you can be in love with more than one person at the same time. And that would also escalate then to having sex. But I guess it has to be where everybody knows up front what's going on. to me, this sounds just so unrealistic for most relationships. Maybe some people can do it. Okay. That's not going to work for me in my relationship. That's probably true for most people, but but then you hear this like, well, historically, polyandry or polygamy and so on was the norm, but historically, mostly it's a few guys getting most of the women, not just sort of randomly distributed throughout the population where people are doing this, right?
Right, and it's only rich people mostly in pre-industrial societies, but it's certainly mostly rich people. And in my experience, open relationships, which is a bigger category than polyamory, but open relationships, they fail miserably in pretty much the same ratio as sexually exclusive marriages. So, trying to have intimate relationships with people and raise children and have a job and take care of your health is complicated. It's complicated. And people, especially Americans, Americans are so famously ahistorical. People forget that as recently as 150 years ago, half of your children died before the age of 5. As recently as 150 years ago, 25% of women died in childbirth. And as recently as 150 years ago, the configuration of people's lives was pretty different. And the choices that people faced were much different. My grandparents had an arranged marriage, and they didn't expect to have enjoyable sex ever. And my parents, who were born in 1925, well, they expected to have great sex or good sex at the beginning, but they knew that sooner or later the sex would peter out, as it did for most people who were born in 1925 or 26, not just that year. I was born in 1950, and I belong to the first generation in the history of the human race. Is that dramatic enough? I belong to the first generation in the history of the human race who believes that it's possible to have long-term, sexually exclusive, fabulous sex. It's never been done before. It's never been done before.
It's one for the history books. Right.
It's never been done. And if you look at long-term sexual exclusivity, if you look at it as a consumer product, products get taken off the market with a much lower failure rate than sexual exclusivity.
Right.
If 35% of the Teslas blew up, they would take Teslas off the market immediately. So sexual exclusivity can be maintained for a short period of time. But again, as we talked about at the beginning of our talk today, people crave novelty and people crave stability. And trying to broker between the need for stability and the desire for novelty is very complicated. And that's why people get involved in their hobbies, or people get involved in things like drinking too much, shopping too much, watching too much TV, stuff like that. What is possible is short-term sexual exclusivity before the habituation takes over, as long as there's still novelty. But once you've seen every single piece of underwear that your partner owns, and once you've heard every different version of their orgasm voice, things start to become a little challenging.
Right. I know one guy that does polyamory, married, and the amount of work that goes into arranging for one of these extramarital relationships, or whatever they're called. I just, like 1,000 emails that have to go back and forth, and everybody knows what's going on. It's like, who has time for this? Right. Jesus.
Right. It really is who has time for this. And And occasionally, I'll have I do get couples coming in saying we're thinking of having, opening the relationship or polyamory or this or that. And, I don't have any objection to that uh, conceptually. But for a lot of people, so what I'll say to a lot of couples is, I'll say, okay, George, you know how Mary, this is a heterosexual couple again, you know how Mary is always wanting to have relationship conversations, and you know how you just wish you could have fewer relationship conversations? Well, open relationships is a lot more conversation, a little bit more sex, and a lot more relationship conversations. You have to have them not only with Mary, but with whoever else you're sleeping with, and sometimes the three of you or the four of you. A lot more relationship conversations, a little bit more sex, a lot more conversation. And that, without me trying to dissuade people, that dissuades a lot of people.
I know another guy that was polyamorous, but he forgot to tell his wife about that. He just told the girlfriends.
Right. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what does work for some couples is to go to a sex club where everybody's having sex, and you don't have to have sex with anybody else, but just being in a large warehouse where people are having sex or walking around naked or making noise or smelling like sex, or where you walk into the warehouse and you agree, we're not going to have sex with anybody else, but you see other people looking at your mate with lust, that can have a real charging effect.
Arousing to the guy.
Yeah,
or to the
to both. To both.
Yeah, to both. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. On the addiction issue, with porn addiction or sex addiction or whatever the issue is it similar to like gambling addiction or drinking or whatever? It's, okay in moderation, but it's to the point where if you lose your job and your spouse leaves you, you have a problem. It's kind of defined by the effects of it.
Well, that's about 5 different questions in one there. What I will say is that the key question about sex addiction or porn addiction is how much agency does a person actually have? The sex addiction movement assumes that people are out of control and that they need an outside intervention to help them manage their choices. The way that I look at it is that it's not that people are out of control, having serial infidelities or going to sex workers a lot or whatever it is. It's not that people are out of control. It's that people keep making choices whose consequences they don't like, and they keep making those same choices. And traditionally, we have a word for that. The word is neurotic. Now, these days, nobody uses that word. But what we mean by that is somebody who keeps making choices whose consequences they don't like. Now, why the heck would somebody do that? Well, one possibility is that they're actually out of control. But for most people, that's not what's going on. For most people, the price that they'd have to pay emotionally for making different choices is higher than they want to pay. So let me give you a real simple example. I think I already referenced, I'm a bit on the chubby side. Thank you very much. You don't get a body like this going to the gym and eating a lot of vegetables. So I love cookies. I love good cookies.
Me too. Yeah.
Good
chocolate chip cookies. Oh my God.
Chocolate chip cookies. I mean, my feeling is who doesn't, but let's not get into that. So before COVID, I used to travel around the country a lot, giving lectures and training therapists and doctors and so on. And inevitably, there's refreshments at the back of the room because I do these all-day trainings, me on stage for a whole day. Inevitably, there's cookies in the back of the room. And so I'd be flying to Pittsburgh or Dallas or whatever, and I'd be saying to myself, now remember, no cookies when you get to Dallas. There are going to be a lot of cookies. Don't eat. Come on, no cookies. I mean, you can go without cookies for a day. Now, I don't have cookies in my house ever. But so I get to Dallas or wherever it is, Pittsburgh, whatever it is, and I give this bang-up half-day lecture, and it's lunchtime, and there's cookies out there. And I make a beeline for the cookies.
Yeah.
And I'm telling myself, don't have a cookie, but I got to have a cookie. And maybe more than one cookie. So why do I do that? And then I regret it And then I always regret it. Why do I keep doing it? Why do I have repetitive decision making whose consequences I don't like? Why do I do that? I'll tell you why I do that. In no particular order. Well, everybody else gets a treat. Why can't I have a treat? I earned this cookie. I just worked my ass off for 3 hours. My doctor says at my age, I have to watch my cholesterol. Screw the doctor. I'm not that old. Oh, if I just have one cookie, that will set me up for the rest of the day. So there's all these reasons that, and if I don't have a cookie, what am I going to have? A carrot? I don't want a damn carrot. So there's all these reasons. They're not good reasons, but they're reasons that a person would have a cookie when they know it's not good for them and they regret afterwards that they did. And they remember the last time they had a cookie. They remember regretting it last time and they do it anyway. So some people would say I'm out of control. And it's easy to say, well, Doc, I have a busy life and I travel. I once said to a friend of mine, well, with all the traveling I do, it's hard to keep my weight down. And he said, I'm sure the cookies don't help either.
Right.
So,
by the way, Marty, have you been to Bristol Farms? They have Bristol Farms. They have these like coffee cup saucer size chocolate chip cookies where there's more.
I don't want to hear it.
There's more walnuts and chocolate than there is dough. Yeah. Now it must be 800 calories, and there's one right across the street from my office here. Yeah.
That's
so I understand.
Unfortunate.
I understand the analogy.
So when you talk to people who go to sex workers, even though they promise they won't, or they have affairs when they promise they won't, or they watch a lot of porn when they promise they won't, and you ask them what's going on, they will say things like, what's the alternative? The alternative would be working on my marriage. Well, I don't want to do that. Or the alternative would be going without a certain kind of emotional nourishment. I don't want to do that. The alternative would be going to bed hungry. I don't want to do that. The alternative would be to be more dependent on my girlfriend or boyfriend. I don't want that. So a lot of people, and I'm not letting people off the hook with this. I'm just saying that, or a lot of people go to sex workers over and over again because they don't feel attractive. And sex workers, their job is to make you feel attractive, to make you feel desired. A lot of people go to sex workers not because it's a great blowjob, but because they feel desired. And for whatever the reason, in their current relationship, no matter what, they are just not going to feel desired. Either they are desired and they don't feel it, or they're not desired, or their partner desires them, but is not willing to use a vocabulary that works for the person. Like if you really desired me, you'd wear lingerie. Well, I really desire you, but I'm not going to put on lingerie. Or if you really desired me, you'd put your finger up my butt when we had sex. No, I don't want to put my finger up your butt when we have sex. So for a lot of people, the alternative to doing things that are labeled sex addiction is just too painful. And so they lie and cheat and steal, and they do whatever they have to do to get the emotional experiences that they want to have. Sometimes it's about the sex, but a lot of times it's not about the sex. It's about, sometimes the sexual enjoyment is part of it, but what tips people over the edge of breaking their promises to their mate or to themselves are wanting a certain kind of emotional experience that they can't figure out how to get in a cost acceptable way.
And so would it be the same kind of thing where, let's say a professional athlete or whoever who's professional loses everything because of addiction to gambling? And there are stories about this where they just can't, no matter what the incentive is. So in your case, you'd have maybe couples where the spouse says, I'm leaving him and taking the kids if he doesn't stop. That's about as big as consequences as you have. And yes, he does it anyway.
Right.
And then, so she leaves. And then why did you give up all of that for this, 5 minutes of fellatio with the sex worker?
Right. And the answer is it's not the 5 minutes of fellatio. It's the 55 minutes of,
No.
I feel like a person. I feel like a real man. I feel seen by somebody. I mean, wanting to feel seen is a huge motivator for people. Now, with gambling, it's different. With gambling, it's about the adrenaline rush. And for somebody who is quote unquote addicted to that adrenaline rush, they need to figure out what they want to do instead of gambling. They might do extreme sports like skiing. I'm not saying extreme skiing is better than gambling, but it does have, I mean, you could die that way. You don't die from gambling, but, with gambling, you can lose a lot very quickly. Or maybe you want to use medication so that you don't need that adrenaline rush quite so intensely. Or maybe you want to understand what it is about the way that you grew up or what it was about your early adulthood that makes you unable to get satisfaction from the more mundane sources of excitement, like a brand new sweater or discovering a Humphrey Bogart film that you've never seen, or going out in nature with somebody that you feel close to, or getting on the floor and playing with your grandchildren. There's lots of places where a person can get a little bit of excitement. And for most people, a little bit of excitement is enough. When somebody is one of these, high adrenaline people, one of the things they need to do is learn how to get more pleasure from much lower levels of excitement. And medication can be helpful with that.
I'm reminded of an episode or a call-in on Dr. Laura's show back when she was on the radio and my car had a radio, which it doesn't anymore. Somebody called in and said, well, I have this porn addiction. I just cannot stop watching porn. I just can't control myself. And Dr. Laura says, are you watching porn right now? He goes, well, no, of course not. I'm talking to you. Okay. Do you watch porn at work and masturbate at work? No, I'd be fired. It's like, all right, apparently you can control it. And he's like, oh, right.
It's hard when a person doesn't share, when John doesn't share Mary's emotional deficits, when Mary is running emotional deficits that John doesn't resonate with, it can be difficult for John to understand the lengths to which Mary will go to address her emotional deficits. That's people in general. When we say, how could somebody risk so much for just X, just sex or just gambling or just alcohol or just whatever it is? If you don't have the same emotional need as that other person, it can be hard to understand why they would be willing to risk so much for what appears to be something fairly trivial.
I see.
But to the person running the emotional deficit, it's not trivial.
Yeah, right. By the way, as a sidebar, would you? What is your opinion of taking the kind of biological or medical model of addiction, which is usually based on physiology and brain chemistry, and applying it to social behavioral things like I have a social media addiction or a porn addiction or whatever? Is that a safe thing to do? Is it risky to do that?
Well, the way I understand the biological basis of addiction is that with certain substances, our body's ability to metabolize those substances normally is damaged or has changed. And so your body doesn't metabolize, say, heroin the way that somebody else's body does, or your body doesn't metabolize heroin after a year of addiction the way that it did the first day that you used heroin. The word addiction, if too many things are an addiction, then the word addiction loses its value. That's true for any word, right? Like abuse, like I get people saying that's emotionally abusive. Well, saying that you're a jerk, if that's emotionally, but you said it in front of the kids, that makes it emotionally abusive. Well, I would say it's ill-advised, but I wouldn't call it emotional abuse. Now, I don't take sides in, is something yes or no? Is that emotional abuse? Is that molestation? I don't take sides. But what I do is I talk about, well, if it is emotional abuse, what is the implications of that? Or what do you mean when you say, is it emotional abuse? So it's the same thing with the word addiction. What does the word addiction mean? If addiction simply means repetitive decision making where you don't like the consequences, then everything can be an addiction. And indeed, some people do say, well, anything can be an addiction. I think at that point, the word addiction loses its value. In terms of social media, I think that social media is a very simple Skinnerian, I want to say call and response, but that's not the right expression. Where with social media, we're all being trained, that if you do a certain thing, you will get a certain desired result. So now, personally, I'm not involved with a smartphone, so that's not an issue for me. But I know most people that every time you pick up, this is the mouse, not my smartphone. Every time you pick it up, there's a good chance that something novel is going to be on that screen. That's tremendously reinforcing to a brain that has evolved over 500,000 years to crave novelty. Because the ability to deal with novelty is very handy, right? As a survival technique, the ability to notice novelty and to deal with it, that's a really handy skill. So here's a little machine, and we're trained that unlike, say, this object here, but this object here, every time you look at it, there's a 50-50 chance, or better than 50-50 chance, that there'll be something really new and colorful, maybe even moving on that screen. Well, who wouldn't be picking that thing up 1,000,000 times a day? So I don't think of that as addiction in the classical sense of addiction. What I do think of is that we are all trained in a very simple Pavlovian way. I mean, some smart person figured out if we can create a free, or apparently free, novelty generating machine that will fit in people's hands, they will go for it like before they'll go for food, for God's sake. And indeed, that is exactly what has happened. So I don't believe in process addictions like shopping addiction. I think that's just a silly idea. The closest thing that I would say to addiction would be the Pavlovian thing that we have with social media. But I wouldn't call that an addiction. I would say that's Pavlovian learning, the same way that you learn to keep your hand away from the hot stove, or you learn every time there's a cookie in your mouth for 5 seconds, you're the happiest person on the planet.
Especially those Bristol Farm cookies. Well, in addiction research, there's this idea of the difference between liking and wanting. And, do I like the drug? I like the alcohol or whatever. But at some point, I guess with addiction, it's not liking so much as just wanting it. That is to say, if I don't get it, I'm going to be anxious, uncomfortable, even in pain. So I'm doing it to reduce the anxiety, reduce the negative stimuli, rather than getting positive stimuli
it's
from
not
it.
It's not that we want a cigarette. We want to postpone the feeling that we have when we don't have a cigarette.
Right. And to me, social media would not be quite like that, but maybe it's because I'm an old baby boomer. I like Twitter. I enjoy it. I follow hundreds of people, and they're always posting interesting articles to read. And
I could sit there for that. How do you have the time to read?
Well, I justify it as part of my research, my job for researching different topics. At least that's the rationalization. It's slightly better than the chocolate chip cookie rationalization, but not much. But when I go off for a couple of days and I end up reading the newspaper, physical newspaper or something, I don't miss it. It's not like, oh God, I got to go on social media.
Well, that's reassuring.
But again, but I'm 68. Maybe somebody who's 15 and has a fear of being left out or fear of missing out and all that stuff that we've been reading about in the current conversation, that, there is a serious problem here that must be addressed. This is what we're hearing. The government needs to regulate the tech companies and break them up. Look at the spike in cutting and anxiety and depression amongst teenagers, especially girls, and you know all this.
Of course.
But again, I don't really know if this is really a serious problem. Maybe in 10 years this will all go away because it was just a trend thing.
This is a problem. I've written a lot about how the psychology profession has completely abandoned Americans because every psychologist is hooked. Every psychologist is hooked on their phone and social media. And so psychology is not talking to families about, what do you mean people bring their phones to dinner? That's one of the very first questions I ask when people come in complaining about their kids. I say, well, do you bring your phone to the dinner table? Now, that's even assuming that people have dinner together, which these days not everybody does anyway.
Right.
But I think that social media is, in my opinion, without question, it's the single biggest mental health problem that we have.
Really? Wow.
And I'll tell you why, very simply, because it has changed the nature. People talk about, this way I get to be connected with so many people. My wife says this. This is one of the things that we have very interesting disagreements about. She's involved with social media and I'm not. And she says, well, I get to be connected with all these people, which is what everybody says. And it all depends on what you mean by connected. And it all depends. And people say, well, when I'm not on social media, I miss all these events or I miss all these things. Like, I didn't know that Jackie was in Nigeria this week. Well, it used to be that Jackie was in Nigeria and you didn't know, and it was all right. And somewhere along the line, it became not okay to not know that Jackie was in Nigeria. And that's problematic, because what that means is that we have all decided that we need to digest more information than the human brain is capable of digesting. You cannot possibly keep track of all that stuff without your head exploding. You can't keep track of all that stuff without feeling depressed. You can't keep track of all that stuff without feeling anxious. You can't keep track of all that stuff without feeling behind. Everybody feels behind. Everybody is constantly trying to catch up to all that incoming stuff.
I can see that. I feel that way sometimes when I'm scanning Twitter to see what my colleagues and friends are doing. And I'm feeling pretty good about myself in the morning. Like, ooh, I wrote another chapter. I did this article, or I did this or that. And then I'll see, oh, so-and-so has a new book, or they got invited to this conference, or they just won this award. I'm thinking, wait a minute, how come I didn't win that award? How come I wasn't invited?
I'm dirt. That's the expression in this house. How was your time?
Right.
How was the conference? Oh, I'm dirt.
Right. Everybody's dirt. So much better than me. Right.
And that's built into. That's not a side effect. That's built in, because the more you feel that other people are doing better than you are, the more not just you, everybody, the more one feels that other people are getting ahead of me, the more one feels compelled to keep track of what everybody's doing. And that's not a side effect. That's built in. And the human brain just can't track all those things all at the same time. And so people are feeling behinder and behinder and behinder.
Especially with the counters on these sites. How many followers do I have compared to this? I have half the followers he has. What?
Yeah.
It's crazy. Completely crazy.
I blog for Psychology Today, and they helpfully let you know how many views each article gets. And they pay you. They pay you. But I'll write like this fabulous article, and I don't check every hour. I don't even check every day. Thank you very much. But I'll check a week later. Only 800 views. Are you kidding me? That's the smartest thing I ever wrote. Only 800 views.
Right. Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens in the coming decades. To what extent these companies keep going. I'm just thinking, well, at one point GM and IBM were the big companies, and now Apple and Google are the big companies, and then in 20 years it'll be something else. And
it'll be something else because of artificial intelligence and because of virtual reality. So
it'll be meta.
Well, I don't know about all that stuff. What I do know about is virtual reality and as far as sex goes, and sex robots, and the fact that very soon, instead of masturbating to a movie, you'll put on goggles and you'll feel like you're at the Algonquin Round Table, asking Dorothy Parker to come up to your hotel room. There's a reference most of you certainly
Right.
will not get. There's two references nobody
Yeah.
except Michael will get. But sooner or later, you'll be able to have the virtual experience of having sex with any famous celebrity you want, and that's going to be interesting to wean people away from, right? Um, and then there'll be the question about infidelity, like if I'm having virtual sex with Scarlett Johansson. Is that a form of infidelity? And if my wife says, now promise me you won't have virtual sex with anybody, and then I go and I do it, nobody got hurt. Scarlett Johansson makes 1/100th of a penny from that, right? And I didn't touch anybody, right? I just masturbated while I was, feeling like I'm in a room with Scarlett Johansson. Is that infidelity? And if I promised my wife that I wouldn't do that, and then I do it anyway, is that infidelity, or is that just lying? Am I just a lying, terrible person? So that's the next thing that's coming, I think.
And I guess the sex doll would be one more step if you cross the uncanny valley to that, and you're actually touching a synthetic tissue that feels like skin, and they're listening to you and talking to you and telling you how handsome and skinny you are, and that's all programmed or whatever.
That's right.
I would think most spouses or partners would feel that's crossing the line.
I do too. And however, the word robot, is sort of a pejorative word. We're gonna hear a new word. I don't know what it is yet, but there are people living in nursing homes who have robot cats and robot dogs.
Yes, yeah.
And apparently they love them.
Yeah.
People are going nuts about, I have a companion, I give it a name, I stroke it, it talks to me, it follows me around. People love that stuff. That's going to be what helps robot sex partners become more acceptable. Robot anythings. I don't know about robot children. They would all keep their rooms clean, right? But I think that we're gonna hear a different word besides robot.
Companion.
Maybe, I don't know, but gradually there'll be more acceptance of that. It'll never be 100%, of course, but gradually there'll be more acceptance of that. Now, what we know is that lots of people are already freaking out about sex dolls that are painted to look like children, right?
Oh, God.
People are freaking out about that.
Yeah, well, yeah.
They actually, there are a couple of states that have passed legislation, and strangely enough, in Canada, they're pursuing legislation outlawing dolls that are painted to look like children that people have sex with.
On that subject, just a related topic of pedophilia, the word, what does it mean? If you are Jeffrey Epstein and you like to have sex with teenage girls, say 14 to 17, that's your kink, your window. Is that not different than a 5-year-old girl or a 7-year-old girl, pre versus post puberty?
Once again, you have succeeded in asking 5 questions in one sentence.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Give it a shot.
In no particular order. We used to have a name for girls who were between 14 and 17. They used to be called wives. So
right.
the idea that a heterosexual man, adult man, who wants to have sex with a 14 to 17-year-old, that there's something wrong with them, I think that's just silly. Now, the fact that an adult man has sex with a 14-year-old girl, that's a different story. But the fact that an adult man desires a 14-year-old girl, from the beginning of time, those girls have been called wives. And in fact,
this anthropologist, Kenneth Good, he was one of Napoleon Chagnon's grad students. They did the Yanomamo ethnographies, and he fell in love with and married one of these Yanomamo girls. She was like 14. And he took her to New Jersey after he was done with his research. And she's like walking around these malls going, what is this? Right. Anyway, ultimately it didn't work out. But his memoir, he talked about this. Like, this was completely, although there were other guys that were not happy about that he did this,
Of course.
that lived there, but that it wasn't like you're a sicko pedophile,
No.
freak.
So pedophile, the actual definition of pedophile, loving of children, it's about sexual attraction to people who are below the age of adulthood. Actually, sexual attraction to people below the age of puberty, what we would call children as opposed to teenagers. But again, we must hasten to say that desire is not the same thing as what a person does. Because most married people, they desire other people. Many married people do not have sex with other people. So we don't say, well, you fantasize with Gertrude, that's as good as or as bad as you having sex with Gertrude. It's not like that old joke about the Catholic Church. You thought it, you'd done it. So we know in a lot of contexts, I think about robbing a bank. I don't get arrested for robbing a bank. So I think about sex with children. It's not the same thing as I have sex with children. So as it happens, people who have sex with children, some of them are interested in having sex with children. Some of them only want to have sex with their own children. And that's a very important distinction that gets lost in the shuffle. I'm not saying that either one is okay, but most people who have sex with their own children, they're not interested in having sex with other children. They're not dangerous. If somebody has sex with your children, as egregious as that is, if somebody has sex with their own children, your children are pretty much safe with them. Now, your children may not be safe with a person who has such bad judgment, but in terms of the sexual acting out, on the other hand, there are people who have sex with children. They're actually not just pedophiles, but they have pedophilic behavior. And for them, a certain amount of it is a crime or a behavior, a choice of opportunity. There's an opportunity, they take it.
How does that come about? Is there just an arrested development in the brain that just they get fixated when they're that age? If somebody that's that age, but they never grow out of that, and they've stuck for life? Is it a brain chemistry thing? What do we know?
Well, I start by saying I'm not the world's expert on the causes of this, and there isn't complete agreement on the causes of this. I think, like with a lot of other things, there are 3 or 4 different career paths, if you will. Just like there are 3 or 4 different career paths to becoming an alcoholic, there are 3 or 4 different career paths to being somebody, an adult who has sex with children. One of them has to do with having what are called the dark triad of personality configurations, which you're probably familiar with. The combination, the simultaneous combination of Machiavellianism and psychopathy and narcissism, what is called the dark triad. And those are the people that we really have to be concerned about, because the lack of empathy in those people, the disconnect with there are consequences on other people for my actions, the feeling that what I want is more important than what anybody else wants, those traits all put together, that predicts that somebody is going to act out sexually. Now, how does a person get like that? It can be in utero, somebody being flooded with hormones in utero that affect their development. It can be really abusive parenting, that when they grow up, they're full of rage. There's this conventional idea these days that if you molest children, you yourself have been molested. That turns out to be not a one-to-one correspondence. I actually get people in the office saying, I was molested as a child. I've never touched a child, but I'm afraid that I will. And there's plenty of people who are molested who never, ever, ever, ever come close to touching another child. It's not a one-to-one correspondence at all.
Right. If anything, you'd think it would be the opposite, because you know how bad it is or how bad it felt. So you wouldn't do that to your own. Yeah.
You would think.
Yeah.
But I get people in the office saying, my father used to whip me when I misbehaved, and it's good enough for my father to whip me, it's good enough for me to whip my kid.
Okay, I see. All right. Could go both ways, yeah. So I was reading this memoir by a woman named Rachel Moran, who is a Irish memoirist who was a prostitute from age 14 to 21. And now she wrote this book, which took her about 10 more years. Now it's about 10 years after that. So she's coming on the show next week. And my attitude toward prostitution was like yours. That is, I think, call it sex work, not prostitution. These are not whores. These are sex workers and so on. We need to destigmatize that and so on. But her book, I have to tell you, was just so disturbing of what these guys did to her. I mean, this isn't Brad Pitt showing up at your hotel room to have sex. I mean, these are disgusting, unkept, uncouth, fat, dirty, unbathed, just bleh. And, no cuddling, no talking, nothing. Just grab her by the hair, shove her face down in their groin and go for it. It's just like, God damn.
Right.
So her position is that it's sexual abuse, whatever you want to call it, even if it's a so-called high-class hooker, the escort, that gets $2,000 a night and is just sleeping with some Fortune 500 high executive guy that's rich and nice and whatever. She said that's pretty rare compared to what, most street sex workers go through. She doesn't even like the word sex worker because she says it's not work. It's not a form of labor. It's different than that. Now I have some conflicting ideas about this because she said, well, the women wouldn't do it if they weren't paid. Well, but if you walk into McDonald's, said, would you work here if you weren't paid? No. Right. So I'm not sure about that. Although maybe sex is just different from everything else because of all the things we've been talking about and the deep evolutionary history to it and how deeply wired it is and important to us, human relations. Maybe it's not the same as labor. So I'm not sure what to think about this. She actually endorses the Nordic model, that is, criminalize the buyers and decriminalize the sellers. Now, Germany is the opposite of that. I think it's all decriminalized and regulated. You get rid of the disgusting guys. You just screen them out, and there's no pimps because it's a regulated business or whatever. You do it online. You're your own manager or whatever. I don't know. So what are your thoughts on sex work or whatever you want to call it? Again, 5 more questions.
Yeah. And answer in 30 seconds, please.
No hard out. We can go for as long as you want.
We already have gone for as long as I want. I can't believe you are spending all this time with me today, Michael. Partly the issue of sex work gets complicated with the context that so many customers are lying and doing it in secret. So many customers are breaking their vows to their partner. So that complicates things. My feeling is that, on the one hand, forcing anybody to do anything is problematic. I know you feel the same way. Nobody should be forced to do anything that they don't want to do. And a lot of prostitution is people being put in positions that they don't want to be in and being forced to do things they don't want to do. And that's horrible. I think it's a little hypocritical, as you yourself said about McDonald's. My example is always working graveyard at 7-Eleven. I think it's a little hypocritical to say, well, people are only prostitutes or sex workers because they don't have better economic choices or whatever. Well, what upper middle class college educated person decides, think I'll work graveyard at 7-Eleven?
Right.
Nobody. So if you want to be concerned about people not having economic choices and therefore use that eye to look at sex work or prostitution, then look at the many ways that plays out in people's lives. And I wouldn't want to be a sex worker because I like to have choices in my life. I like to choose who I have sex with. Thank you very much. Just like I like to choose what food I eat. But there's a lot of jobs that somebody will say, I would rather eat dirt than do that job, or I'd rather be a prostitute than do that job, or I'd rather work graveyard at 7-Eleven than do that job. So for some people, it's the best choice that they have an option to do. And unless I'm that person, I'm not in a very good position to judge if they made a good decision or a bad decision. What I do think is problematic is the way that prostitution inevitably, or sex work, gets lumped in with vice, with other illegal activities, and then inevitably bureaucratized by violent people. And I wouldn't want to participate in any of that. And I'm sympathetic about that. I don't know from a public policy point of view what we ought to do. I know that that arresting sex workers and making their lives even more miserable, that's probably not the best way to approach this. That seems pretty obvious.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about, oh, by the way, as a sidebar, she mentioned that when she told the guy she was 15, they got off much faster.
Right.
It's like, whoa, that's weird. But then from what we were talking about, yeah, okay, there's probably something deep in human nature about that. But the other thing about it is much of the literature, including in her book, the women are inevitably portrayed as not having much agency. And the examples are understandable. Her case, her parents, one of them was schizophrenic and the other one was manic depressive, and she was on the street, homeless at age 14 in Dublin. And just this kind of miserable existence. And she has this boyfriend that pimps her out. Terrible, just terrible. And okay, so, but there's a lot of stories like that. But what about the Johns? Why did they have agency, whereas the women are victims? Maybe the guys have some problem. Why are the guys going to a street hooker like that, or sex worker? Maybe there's something weird in their background. How come we're not? I don't know. Maybe there's studies about this. I don't really know the literature, but in other words, it's just human behavior. If we're going to attribute human behavior to external causes, then why not the men as well as the women?
Well, it is a good question. Why do men go to sex workers? And as we've been talking about in various ways, a certain amount of it is, I have an emotional need, and this is a person who sells a product that addresses my emotional needs. I mean, we are in a capitalist culture where people who have a few bucks and who want a service or a product, they go and they get a service or a product. When I go to McDonald's, I don't go to McDonald's, but when I go to McDonald's, since you brought it up, I'm generally fairly polite because that's the best way to get what I want. If you go to a pro football game or a college football stadium, you behave differently than you behave when you go to the dentist or when you go to McDonald's. And I think that when you go to a sex worker, the latitude, the kinds of behavior that are tolerated in that interaction, or that the John imagines are tolerable in that interaction, are much, much, much broader than in practically any other consumer setting. And it would be nice if that changed. It would be nice if everybody understood, well, if you're going to go to a hooker or a prostitute or a sex worker, at the very least, brush your teeth. You got to do that. But I know people who don't brush their teeth before they go to the dentist. I was shocked to find that out.
Yeah.
I was shocked. Of course I brush my teeth before I go to the dentist.
Yeah, of course. You don't want to be embarrassed.
and if I were going to go to a sex worker, I personally, of course I would brush my teeth. But a lot of people, they don't think that way.
I think in terms of if it was regulated, decriminalized and regulated as a business, you would have age limits. You have to be 21 and older, and if you have to be consenting and you're capable of signing a contract or whatever. Right. So here are my kind of libertarian tendencies. What two consenting adults do in the privacy of their bedroom is none of my business, and it's none of the government's business either. Okay. But then you get to what is consenting. So if you have these polygamous families, these fundamentalist Mormons, where the girls are raised from the age of 1, you're going to get to be a sister wife. You get to marry this guy who's going to be 65 by the time you're 15. Lucky you. They don't know any different. So maybe by the time you see these TV shows, Sister Wives, where they're all, in the house together and it's big fun, makes for great television, did can they consent if they don't know what the world is actually like, right? Because there's memoirs of people that get out. What's the I forget the name of that memoir of the woman who was in one of these fundamentalist.
Yeah, if you don't know you have the option, then are
Yeah.
you really consenting?
Right.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I think that speaks to the question. You talked about you as a libertarian. I mean, I certainly have my libertarian side. On the other hand, I like that the government, has meat inspectors. I really
Yes.
like that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that where libertarianism has its limits, I think, is when we acknowledge the uneven power dynamic between consumers and providers. So I'm not in a position to inspect meat, right? I'm not in a position to smoke my own meat or have my own slaughterhouse or anything like that. So I turn to the government and I say the equivalent of, look, I need you and all us consumers who want to eat healthy meat. Could you please inspect all the meat? They say yes, and the meat providers, they go along with that. It makes their product more trustworthy. Everybody gets along. In other arenas, you and I, as libertarians, we agree. We don't want the government involved. I'm perfectly capable of doing that myself. I don't need pencil inspectors. I can inspect a pencil myself. When it comes to sex work, we're probably looking at a situation where the consumers and the providers don't have equal power in the marketplace, and so that's why we would say we want the government involved, so there could be product inspection, if you will, so there could be age limits, because we can easily imagine there's a lot of 16 or 17-year-olds who, unfortunately, would be willing to provide sex services, and plenty of men who would be willing to consume those sex services. But as a society, we decide, you know what, we don't want that going on. And because the 16 and 17-year-olds aren't in a position necessarily to say no, so even though we're libertarians, we say, well, there, I want a certain kind of government control.
Yeah. Yeah. Then there's another kind of level of argument mostly by religious conservatives that, yes, you're consenting adults and doing your own thing, pornography, prostitution, whatever, but it brings down the neighborhood and it kind of lowers the standards of the whole society. This is why, rock music lyrics, we got to censor that. And, certain art is kind of degrading. We don't want our children to see that. You have to have standards on television of what, kind of language is used. That's their argument that, in this case, they're not libertarian, that the individual is not the fundamental unit. It's the family or the society or something larger that I think captures the conservative worldview, in which they make that argument. You watching porn or whatever, but if there's porn houses or whatever, it used to be those girls theaters, whatever, that we don't have to have anymore. But that was the idea. It's bringing down the neighborhood, like graffiti, like the broken windows theory of crime. It just kind of lowers everybody's standards and norms of what's acceptable.
Well, that would be one thing if there was unanimity on what values society wanted to embrace. But when someone says, that porn theater brings down the neighborhood, or you looking at porn in your own private bedroom brings down the neighborhood, I say, well, you teaching in your church that masturbation is evil, that brings down the neighborhood. So until we have, unless we have a unanimity of values, and I'm not saying that this would be a good thing, by the way. Look at Iran, look at Saudi Arabia, right?
Yeah.
But
right.
unless there's a uniformity or a unanimity of values, that approach doesn't work, because what brings down the neighborhood to you is art to me. And what brings down the neighborhood to me is religious beauty or morality to you. So that's why that approach doesn't work. The thing with graffiti is that there's pretty much unanimity that graffiti is a bad thing. So that's why we can all agree. Or broken windows,
Right.
there's science to back it up. It's not just that broken windows are aesthetically unattractive. There's science behind the broken window theory of crime. So I'm sympathetic about people who feel that they're living in a culture that they're not comfortable in. And as I've gotten older, I've emphasized that more in my work, like with America's War on Sex and all that. I really am sympathetic about people who, every time they turn around, they feel like there's sex in their face. Their solution to that, of course, I disagree with. And by the way, what I talked about in America's War on Sex is that it's conservatives or people who are uncomfortable with sex who sexualize a lot of things or create sexual meaning out of a lot of things. If I walk down the street with you and we're arm in arm because we're friendly and we like each other and we like the feeling of cuddling up a little bit, some people will look at that as a non-sexual thing that doesn't deserve notice. But there's some people who look at that and say, why do those gay people have to shove their sexuality in our face? They're the ones who have created a sexual meaning out of that display, out of that wholesome, if you will, that non-sexual display. And people who are against sex, they're creating sexual meanings out of things all over the place all the time. So
yeah, like Jerry Falwell. Remember when Jerry
Yeah.
Falwell, what was that cartoon series he didn't like? Because one of the characters was purple.
The Teletubbies.
Teletubbies, right? That's right. He
Or
was certain this was, grooming America's children for pedophilia.
Or the Attorney General who insisted on covering up the Statue of Liberty behind him because it was a woman with a breast exposed. The statue, this classical Greek statue. So part of their discomfort is their own fault because they're the ones who are sexualizing things that aren't necessarily sexual.
Right. Yes, that's like the preacher who's denouncing homosexuality who gets busted with a gay prostitute guy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. All right, another hot button cultural issue is the case against the sexual revolution. This was Louise Perry's book. I had her on the podcast, and there's Carol Tavris, our mutual friend, reviewed 3 of these books that all came out in the last 6 months, all by women in their 30s, basically arguing, I fucked around when I was in my 20s because the feminists told me that I can have sex like men, all the partners I want, all the big fun, lots of variety, and it didn't work out that great. It wasn't great at all. And then they make the argument that there is a difference between male and female sexuality. Guys do like more variety and more partners and so forth, and women are more risk averse and more choosy and careful, and that ultimately leads to these male-female differences, and women are going to get hurt if they try to have sex like a man. I'm oversimplifying, but you know the argument. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I do. Well, again, 5 questions in one sentence. For starters, if you take 1,000 women and 1,000 men, and you take the average height of those 2 groups, the average man will be taller than the average woman. But in those 1,000 women, there will be many women who are taller than many of the men. Tall women are taller than short men.
Overlapping bell curves, yeah.
Thank you. Overlapping bell curves. And that's also true with sexuality with men and women. I mean, you can talk about the average woman or the average man who doesn't exist. But what's true is that there are lots of women who are higher desire than lots of men. The average woman has lower desire than the average man, although that's more true between the ages of 15 and 40 than after 40, between 15 and 35. After about 35 or 40, male and female sexuality converge a lot. And that doesn't get talked about very much.
No, I never heard that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you don't get a lot of 64-year-old guys saying, I'm so horny I could stick it into mud tonight. You get a few, but it's not like when you're 28 years old. A lot of 64-year-old men would say, I would love to have a really great blowjob and then somebody I can talk to, right? So in terms of, differences between men and women sexually, first of all, if you want to talk about the average man and the average woman, fine, but there is no such person as the average woman and the average man. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that 25-year-olds are not a homogeneous group sexually. I mean, there are lots and lots and lots of 25-year-olds who have never had decent sex in their lives. And there's lots of 25-year-olds who sex is just the most fabulous thing in the world. And to try and portray women, or men for that matter, in a certain way, I think it is just oversimplifying the situation. Are there people who have gotten hurt from the so-called sexual revolution? Yes, of course. On the other hand, there are lots and lots and lots of women who, before the sexual revolution, their sexuality was demonized. Like, if a woman, there was even a psychiatric diagnosis, of nymphomania, right? Now, we say now, nymphomania, that's a woman who wants sex one more time than her partner, right? So now we don't use that expression nymphomania. Say, oh, that woman has higher desire than that person. Okay. Or they have higher desire than average. Okay. But for all the women who have been hurt by the sexual revolution, there's just as many women who, in 1949, they would have been demonized as easy or sluts, or they would have been ashamed of their sexuality. Whereas now, in the year 1990 or the year 2010 or 2030, they're looked on as healthy, passionate women. So I think it's just an oversimplification. I do think that the idea that anybody can have sex without consequences over the long haul is probably naive. Men don't have all of that men's sex without consequences on them, and neither do women. I think the sexual revolution, having lived through it, thank you very much. I had my first sexual experience with a person when I was in 1968. So that makes me like really at the vanguard of the sexual revolution, right? My first girlfriend, she had to hide her birth control pills from her mother.
Wow.
So, now what was I saying? So that was the point before that, people were suffering, and after that, people were suffering. They might have been suffering in different ways. Fair enough. But any time there's a cultural shift, it's not that we eliminate suffering. It's that we change who suffers. We change under what conditions people suffer. And we don't know in advance, like this author you're quoting says, we can't anticipate exactly what the consequences are going to be. But these days, you can walk into Walmart and buy condoms without having to ask a pharmacist for condoms. You can go into Walmart and buy a vibrator, which is one of the single most liberating things for women ever. You can now buy a vibrator on Amazon.com. You can buy it at Walmart or CVS. And that's a direct product of the so-called sexual revolution. So I think it's a one-sided view. I'm sympathetic with the point that there's been suffering in the wake of that. I'm totally sympathetic about that because in 1969 or 1970, there were a lot of women who previously didn't feel like they should have sex in order to be normal. They felt pressured anyway. But prior to 1970, you didn't have people saying, all the other girls have sex, what's wrong with you? 1970, all the other girls have sex, what's wrong with you? Gee, I guess you're right. Gee, I should have sex. That's not okay. That's terrible. But so now we have, all the other girls are trans. What's wrong with you?
Right. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
So to finish that thought, I think what's true is that we were all kind of naive about the level of communication skills that we should have if we're going to turn ourselves loose sexually. You need to be able to talk about, I like this, I don't like that. I want this, I don't want that. It's not that it's bad to turn sex loose like we did. I think the problem is if you turn it loose without giving people the skills that they need to administer this high octane sexuality, then of course people are going to get hurt. It's not only females either. Of course people are going to get hurt. What we've learned along the way, and when we talk about BDSM, we always talk about communication, right? If you're going to spank people, you better talk to them first. That's terrific. That's terrific. What I would say is, if you're going to take off your clothes with somebody, you ought to be able to talk with them first.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I had a couple thoughts when I was reading Louise's book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, was how do you know that you really resented it back then, now that you're in your 30s, and that
Right.
was back in your 20s, like where we started this conversation off, Daniel Kahneman's idea of the remembered self versus the experiencing self.
Right. Right.
Maybe maybe there's more than one self, or it's an evolving self. And you said, well, when I was in my early 20s, I fucked around and had a good time. And now I'm in my mid 30s. If I did that now, I would not be happy with myself. So I'm
Right.
not going to do that now.
Right.
So I was a different person. You kind of evolved. But with whatever the social pressures are, whatever's going on in your head, when you think about that in your mid 30s, you're looking back and you're going, okay, you know what? I must have resented that. Okay, so let me set it up here for you. So Louise Perry did, before she came on the show, I watched this debate she did on a feminist podcast. So the host had her and this other woman named Aella, Aella. She is the highest earner on Fans Only. She was making upwards at her top, like $100,000 a month. Doing, I don't know, masturbating on for guys
You and I
online
are
or
in the
whatever.
wrong
And
business.
yeah, I mean, it's just astonishing. I mean, her attitude is sex work, that people want to shut down sex work. He says, fuck you. I'm making good money. Thank you
Right.
very much. I'm not being
Right.
abused. I'm not being used and so on. I'm in complete control, right? Anyway, so then she tells this story when the two of them are debating about this, that in her early 20s, she shared an apartment with like 3 other girls, and they had big fun, lots of parties, lots of guys, lots of sex. And they all talked about it all the time, and they all enjoyed it. Then, like 10 years later, she sees one of the women that she shared the apartment with going on about, I really resent it. I hated it. I never liked it. And so this Ayala woman is going, I call bullshit on that. I was there
Right.
with you.
Right.
You said you enjoyed it. I know you did.
Right.
So this is one of those remembered versus experiencing self examples.
Yeah, that's a great example. I mean, if you ran around a lot when you were 20, and then when you were 30, you married a religious person, you'd remember your past differently. So we can agree on that. That's a good place for us to stop for today.
Okay, sounds good, Marty. Man, we covered a lot of material here. 2.5 hours. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. You know what you're doing in exposing different speakers to the public is so important. People who, I'm not just talking about me, I mean, but other people.
No,
I'm
thank you.
aware. I've seen so many of your podcasts and read your books, and this is where I get to say to you, what you do is so valuable and so important, and you expose the public to ideas and to writers and speakers that they wouldn't be exposed to otherwise. And that work is just really so important. So thank you.
Well, gosh, I'm blushing now. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks again, Marty.